I woke up in a dark forest. I could feel a warm liquid running down the back of my head. I reached my arm around my head only to find out that there was a massive bump on it. Further inspection led me to believe I had been knocked out for a couple of hours now. I slowly started to lift my head off the cold, hard ground, and I eventually got up. I stumbled my way through the foggy forest, and I eventually came across a silhouette of what appeared to be an old, broken-down house. I contemplated whether I should enter the house and look for help, or if I should just turn around and look somewhere else. Thinking that this might be the only house that I stumble upon, I walked towards the old, crooked home. When I got to the doorstep, I noticed that the door was all boarded up. I tried to grip one of the boards to rip it off, but it didn't budge. Exhausted, I walked around the house hoping to find a back door, or even an open window that I could crawl through. The only open window I came upon was on the second floor, and there was no way I was getting up there. I couldn't help but notice that there was a shed behind the house, and that the door wasn't boarded up. I turned the rusty doorknob and the door gently creaked open. Laying on the floor, I found an old crowbar which had a thin layer of dust on it. I walked back to the front of the house and attempted to pry the door open. Eventually, the door opened up just enough for me to slither through the open space. Total darkness surrounded me as I reached for my pocket and pulled out a lighter. I turned on my lighter and the small orange light made it just bright enough to see. I noticed that all the furniture looked very old and had a lot of dust on it. This house probably hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. I scanned the walls of the room to try and find a light switch, only to find nothing. I headed down the hallway on my right and I found 3 rooms. I slowly entered the first room and I felt a cold current of air blow past me. The room I was in looked like a girl's room. The walls were a sickening shade of pink, and there were what seemed to be ripped up dolls and teddy bears littering the wooden floor. On the other side of the room, there was a small wooden desk with what looked like a small red notebook that someone had left open. I walked towards the desk and picked the small notebook up. I flipped through a couple of pages, but it was all written in German. I noticed that the farther into the notebook I went, the sloppier and worse the handwriting got. I tried to skip all the way to the end, but all I found were ripped up pages and what looked like blood stains. There was no doubt that I was genuinely creeped out, so I quickly got out of the room and proceeded to explore the rest of the house. I walked out into the hallway and saw a door on my right. I tried opening the door, but it was locked, so I figured maybe I could kick it down. I took a running start and broke down the door my first try. Behind it, there was a staircase heading down into the basement. I slowly walked down the stairs, trying to avoid the pieces of glass that littered it. Eventually, I made it to the bottom where it was nearly pitch black. I pulled out my lighter and turned it on again. There was red writing on the wall which read, "Leave now." Suddenly, I heard a loud crash upstairs. I ran quickly upstairs and found the body of a teenage girl lying in the living room I was just in. I stood in front of her, horrified and unable to move. I heard footsteps behind me and I was confronted by what I could only describe as a shadow man. He looked at me with his red, soulless eyes. "What are you doing here?" I fell backwards on my hands, nearly hitting my head against the wall. The shadow man stood still and looked at me for a couple of seconds. I swiftly got up and started running to the door, almost tripping on the dead girl in the process. I exited the house and started running as fast as I possibly could. I could feel the blood rushing through my whole body. I looked behind me to see if the creature was still chasing me. But as I turned my head to look behind me, I felt something hit me in the back of the head. I woke up in a dark forest. I could feel a warm liquid running down the back of my head. I reached my arm around my head only to find a massive bump there. I slowly got up and started stumbling my way through the foggy forest. I was confronted by an old broken down house. I decided to enter the crooked home.